Did you know that more international war films received widespread distribution during this decade than in any previous era? While blockbusters like The Longest Day and The Great Escape remain celebrated, dozens of remarkable war films from this pivotal decade have faded from public memory. What overlooked masterpieces from this transformative era might change your understanding of how cinema portrays humanity's most devastating activity? Number 15. Hell is for Heroes, 1962. Don Siegel's gritty combat film follows a small American squad ordered to defend a section of the Siegfried Line in 1944 while creating the illusion they're a much larger force. Steve McQueen stars as Private Reese, a demoted former officer and hardened combat veteran who takes command when the situation deteriorates. What distinguishes Hell is for Heroes is its unflinching bleakness. Made between the patriotic World War II films of the 1950s and the cynical Vietnam-influenced war movies of the late 1960s, Siegel's film strips away sentimentality and glory, presenting combat as grim, chaotic, and psychologically damaging. The film's tight 90-minute running time maintains relentless tension without unnecessary subplot or comic relief. McQueen delivers one of his finest performances as the antisocial, combat-addicted Reese. The supporting cast includes James Coburn, Bobby Darin, and Bob Newhart, creating a unit of distinct individuals rather than war movie archetype. Notably, the film avoids the usual multi-ethnic platoon cliches in favor of more psychologically complex characterizations. Cinematographer Harold Lipstein creates stark, documentary-like visuals using natural light and unpolished compositions that emphasize the muddy, exhausted reality of frontline combat. The film's climactic assault on a German bunker achieves remarkable tension through tactical realism rather than heroic spectacle. Despite studio interference that forced some script changes, Siegel's unsentimental direction makes Hell is for Heroes a precursor to the more cynical war films that would emerge as Vietnam escalated. Its matter-of-fact portrayal of combat's psychological toll and the dehumanizing effects of prolonged fighting feels more honest than many more celebrated war epics, making it a forgotten classic that resonates with modern understanding of combat trauma. Number 14. The Hill, 1965. Sidney Lumet's blistering drama unfolds in a British military prison in North Africa during World War II, where 5 soldiers face brutal punishment under the desert sun. Sean Connery, taking a dramatic break from his James Bond persona, stars as Joe Rock, a former sergeant major imprisoned for assaulting an officer who ordered a suicidal attack. The film's central focus is The Hill, an artificial mound of sand that prisoners must climb repeatedly while carrying heavy packs in the scorching heat. This punishment becomes both literal torture and powerful metaphor for military authorities. Arbitrary cruelty, particularly under the sadistic Staff Sergeant Williams. What makes The Hill exceptional is Lumet's documentary-like approach to the material. Shot in stark black and white by Oswald Morris, the film employs handheld cameras, natural lighting, and disorienting angles to create unbearable tension and convey the prisoner's subjective experience of heat and exhaustion. The confined setting creates claustrophobic pressure that builds toward inevitable violence. Connery delivers perhaps his finest dramatic performance, stripping away his star charisma to create a broken man struggling to maintain dignity under dehumanizing conditions. The supporting cast creates a microcosm of military class structures and power dynamics. Unlike conventional prison break narratives, The Hill focuses on psychological rather than physical escape. The screenplay by Ray Rigby examines how institutional power corrupts even basically decent men, while military codes of conduct prevent necessary challenges to abusive authority. This exploration of how military systems can become divorced from the values they supposedly defend creates disturbing relevance far beyond its specific setting. Though acclaimed upon release, The Hill has been overshadowed by better-known prison dramas, despite offering one of cinema's most powerful examinations of how war distorts justice even among supposed allies. Number 13. King and Country, 1964. Joseph Losey's devastating chamber drama examines the case of Private Arthur Hamp, a simple working-class soldier who, after 3 years in the trenches and the deaths of all his original comrades, walks away from the front lines during World War I. Charged with desertion, Hamp is defended by Captain Hargreaves, an upper-class officer who initially views the assignment with contempt, but gradually develops sympathy for his client's plight. What makes King and Country exceptional is its radical rejection of war film conventions. Rather than depicting battlefield action, Losey concentrates entirely on the psychological and class dimensions of military justice. The muddy, rat-infested trench settings become expressionistic representations of war's dehumanization rather than realistic combat zones. Dennis Coop's black and white cinematography employs stark lighting, claustrophobic framing, and disorienting angles to create visual metaphors for psychological distress. The sound design creates overwhelming atmosphere without showing actual combat. This approach achieves more powerful anti-war commentary through suggestion than explicit violence. Courtenay delivers an extraordinary performance as Hamp, conveying both simple-minded bewilderment and profound moral clarity about the insanity of his situation. Bogard matches him as Hargreaves, whose aristocratic reserve gradually crumbles as he recognizes the fundamental injustice of sacrificing a broken man for institutional discipline. Their interactions create devastating commentary on how class differences persist even in the supposedly egalitarian crucible of war. The film's unflinching examination of military justice creates moral complexity rarely found in traditional war narratives. The final sequence, where Hamp must be drunk and physically supported to face the firing squad, remains one of cinema's most devastating indictments of war's dehumanizing bureaucracy. Despite critical acclaim, King and Country remains overshadowed by better-known World War I films, despite offering perhaps the most powerful examination of how military justice can become divorced from basic humanity. Number 12. Attack on the Iron Coast, 1968. This taut British-American production follows the obsessive Major Jamie Wilson, a Canadian commando leader planning a suicidal raid on a Nazi naval installation after his previous failed attempt resulted in heavy casualties. Facing resistance from military brass and his own psychological demons, Wilson must train a new team of commandos for a mission many believe impossible. What distinguishes Attack on the Iron Coast is its focus on the psychological cost of command and the moral complexity of high-casualty operations. Director Paul Wendkos avoids both rah-rah patriotism and anti-war messaging, instead examining the thin line between determined leadership and destructive obsession. Wilson's single-minded focus on redeeming his previous failure raises difficult questions about whether personal vindication justifies risking additional lives. Lloyd Bridges, primarily known for lighter roles, delivers a surprisingly dark performance as a man haunted by responsibility for his men's deaths, yet willing to risk more lives to prove his tactical theories. Andrew Keir provides perfect counterpoint as Commander Owen Franklin, the skeptical British officer who must balance Wilson's risky plan against potential strategic gains. Their conflict embodies the tension between bold action and responsible caution that defines military leadership. The film's practical special effects achieve remarkable realism on a modest budget. Cinematographer Reginald Wire creates moody compositions that emphasize the psychological isolation of command, while the location shooting in England creates authentic period atmosphere without elaborate sets or digital enhancement. Unlike many commando films that emphasize heroic success, Attack on the Iron Coast maintains moral ambiguity about its mission's value and its protagonist's motivations until the final frames. This refusal to offer simple answers about military sacrifice creates more thoughtful war commentary than many bigger-budget productions. Despite featuring solid performances and impressive action sequences, the film has been largely forgotten, perhaps because it arrived amid a glut of World War II movies without the star power of better-known entries. Today, its examination of leadership psychology and the human cost of strategic decisions remains relevant to understanding modern military operations. Number 11. Beach Red, 1967. Directed by and starring Cornell Wilde, this unflinching examination of a Marine landing on a Japanese-held island in the Pacific War offers one of cinema's most visceral depictions of combat. The film follows Captain MacDonald and his men as they establish a beachhead and push inland, encountering increasingly desperate Japanese defenders. What makes Beach Red revolutionary is its subjective approach to combat. Unlike the objective documentary style of many war films, Wilde employs flashbacks, fantasy sequences, and internal monologues to show how fear, memory, and desire shape soldiers' experiences of battle. This technique, presenting both American and Japanese perspectives with equal empathy. The film's visual style was years ahead of its time. Cinematographer Cecil Cooney employs handheld cameras, jarring jump cuts, blood-red filters, and surreal superimpositions to create a fragmented, hallucinatory portrait of battle that influenced later films like The Thin Red Line and Saving Private Ryan. The combat sequences focus unflinchingly on physical damage, with wound effects that remain shockingly realistic. Wilde's performance as the battle-weary captain avoids both heroic cliches and anti-war caricature, creating a complex portrait of a man trying to balance mission accomplishment with preserving his men's lives. Rip Torn provides powerful support as the brutal Sergeant Honeywell, while Japanese actors, including Jaime Sanchez and Genki Koyama, bring humanity to the defenders, showing how similar fears and desires animate soldiers on both sides. The film's most distinctive feature is its refusal to glorify violence. Unlike many war films that inadvertently make combat exciting, Beach Red portrays battle as fundamentally ugly, chaotic, and dehumanizing. The screenplay includes poetic internal monologues that contrast sharply with the brutal reality, creating powerful commentary on war's destruction of human potential. Despite its innovative techniques and unflinching honesty, Beach Red was overshadowed by bigger-budget war films of its era. Today, its subjective approach to combat psychology and its equal treatment of combatants from both sides feels more modern than many contemporary war films. Number 10. The Victors, 1963. Carl Foreman's ambitious anti-war epic follows a single American infantry squad across Europe during World War II, from the beaches of Sicily to post-war Berlin. Rather than focusing on major battles, the film examines the psychological and moral impact of occupation duty, presenting war as a corrupting force even for the victorious Allies. What distinguishes The Victors is its episodic structure and moral complexity. Each segment examines different aspects of war's dehumanization, from exploitation of desperate civilian women to the execution of deserters to the casual cruelty that emerges from prolonged exposure to violence. This approach creates a comprehensive portrait of how even a good war erodes basic humanity among supposedly heroic liberators. The film features an extraordinary international cast including George Peppard, Eli Wallach, George Hamilton, Albert Finney, and Jean Moreau. Rather than creating conventional war heroes, these actors portray ordinary men gradually corrupted by power over devastated populations. The female characters receive unusual depth for war films of this era. Cinematographer Christopher Challis employs stark black and white photography that blends documentary-like combat footage with more stylized sequences examining moral corruption. The film's most famous scene creates devastating, ironic contrast that remains shocking decades later. Unlike conventional war narratives focused on combat achievement, The Victors examines how military occupation creates moral compromise even among well-intentioned liberators. The film's clear parallels to America's emerging role as global military power during the Cold War created controversial commentary on how victory can become its own form of corruption. Despite its all-star cast and acclaimed director, The Victors underperformed commercially, perhaps because its unsentimental portrayal of American troops challenged popular narratives about the greatest generation. Today, its clear-eyed examination of military occupation's corrupting influence feels more honest than many more celebrated World War II films. Number 9. Play Dirty, 1969. This cynical late-60s war film follows Captain Douglas, a British Petroleum Company officer in North Africa who is coerced into leading a mission to destroy a Nazi fuel depot. His team consists not of trained soldiers, but criminals and misfits, led by the amoral Captain Cyril Leach, who has been secretly ordered to ensure Douglas doesn't return alive. What makes Play Dirty exceptional is its complete rejection of heroic war film conventions. Director André de Toth, a veteran filmmaker who lost an eye yet remarkably directed 3D films, creates a morally ambiguous world where distinction between allies and enemies becomes meaningless. The film's structure deliberately subverts audience expectations. Missions fail, characters die unceremoniously, and traditional military virtues like courage and loyalty lead to destruction rather than victory. Michael Caine delivers one of his finest early performances as Douglas, whose transformation from by-the-book officer to pragmatic survivor forms the film's emotional core. Nigel Davenport brings complex shadings to Leach, creating an anti-hero whose amoral approach to war ultimately seems more honest than official military rhetoric. Their evolving relationship provides psychological depth rare in combat films of this era. Cinematographer Edward Scaife captures the North African desert in widescreen compositions that emphasize both its harsh beauty and the vulnerability of humans in this unforgiving environment. The film's muted, color palette and documentary-like approach to violence create stark contrast with more glamorized war films of the period. The screenplay by Melvin Bragg and Lotta Collin systematically dismantles war film cliches while offering disturbing parallels to the ongoing Vietnam conflict. The final sequence delivers a devastating commentary on military incompetence and the ultimate futility of individual heroism within bureaucratic warfare. Despite its impressive craftsmanship and prescient anti-war sentiment, Play Dirty received limited distribution and has been overshadowed by better-known war films of its era. Today, its cynical perspective and moral complexity feel more aligned with contemporary understanding of warfare than many of its more celebrated contemporaries. Number 8. War Hunt, 1962. This psychologically complex Korean war drama marked the film debuts of both Robert Redford and director Sidney Pollack. The story follows Private Endor, a soldier who sneaks into enemy territory nightly to kill North Korean soldiers with a knife, keeping count of his victims. The new replacement, Private Hackett, becomes both fascinated and disturbed by Endor's private war, particularly his relationship with a Korean orphan boy he's training in his lethal skills. What makes War Hunt remarkable is its focus on the psychological rather than physical dimensions of combat. While most war films of the era emphasized battlefield heroics, director Dennis Sanders examines how prolonged combat creates both institutional normalization of killing and individual pathology. Endor's behavior raises uncomfortable questions about what military training actually produces. John Saxon delivers a chilling performance as Endor, creating a character whose calm exterior masks profound psychological damage. His matter-of-fact approach to killing becomes more disturbing than theatrical madness would be. Redford, in his first substantial film role, brings moral complexity to Hackett, whose initial admiration for Endor's effectiveness gradually transforms into horror at his dehumanization. Cinematographer Ted McCord employs stark black and white photography with noir-influenced lighting to create visual metaphors for moral ambiguity. The night sequences achieve remarkable tension through suggestion rather than explicit violence, while the daylight scenes in the American camp create dissonant normality that makes Endor's behavior more disturbing. Unlike most Korean war films that followed World War II narrative patterns, War Hunt anticipates the psychological complexity that would later characterize Vietnam cinema. Its examination of how institutions normalize disturbed behavior when it serves military purposes creates uncomfortable parallels to modern understanding of combat psychology and the creation of effective killers. Despite strong reviews, War Hunt received limited distribution and has been largely forgotten, except as a footnote in Redford and Pollack's careers. Today, its psychological depth and moral complexity feel more contemporary than many better-known war films of its era, making it worthy of rediscovery. Number 7. Battle of the Bulge, 1965. This widescreen epic depicts Germany's last major offensive on the Western Front during World War II, when Nazi forces launched a surprise attack through the Ardennes forest in December 1944. The film follows multiple storylines on both sides of the conflict, focusing on intelligence officer Lieutenant Colonel Kiley, who warns of the impending attack, and his German counterpart Colonel Hessler, commanding a panzer unit. What distinguishes Battle of the Bulge is its ambitious scope and visual spectacle. Director Ken Anakin employs ultra-panavision 70mm photography to create sweeping battlefield vistas that emphasize the massive scale of the operation. The tank battle sequences create visceral combat sequences that maintain impressive realism despite technical limitations. Robert Shaw delivers a standout performance as Hessler, creating a German commander who is professional and determined rather than ideologically fanatical. His clear-eyed assessment of Germany's desperate situation creates more complex antagonists than typical war film Nazis. Henry Fonda brings characteristic integrity to Kiley, while Charles Bronson, Telly Savalas, and James MacArthur create distinctive supporting characters among the American defenders. The film's most effective sequences focus on the fog of war, both literal and figurative. The battle scenes in snow-covered forests create visually striking combat environments rarely seen in war films, while the narrative emphasizes how confusion, miscommunication, and limited visibility shape the historical battle. Benjamin Frankel's driving orchestral score enhances the action without romantic glorification. While historians have criticized its historical inaccuracies, the film succeeds as dramatic interpretation of how determination and improvisation allowed Allied forces to recover from surprise attack. Unlike many American war films, Battle of the Bulge acknowledges German tactical professionalism while still conveying the operation's ultimate futility. Though commercially successful upon release, Battle of the Bulge has been critically overshadowed by more prestigious World War II films, despite offering some of the most impressive large-scale battle sequences of its era. Its commitment to showing both sides of the conflict with relative objectivity feels more contemporary than many more simplistic war narratives. Number 6. The Train, 1964. John Frankenheimer's taut thriller follows a French resistance operator, Labiche, tasked with preventing Nazi Colonel von Waldheim from transporting a train filled with priceless French art treasures to Germany in the final days of the occupation. What begins as a straightforward mission becomes a moral crucible, as Labiche must decide whether cultural heritage justifies the human cost of resistance operations. What makes The Train exceptional is its rejection of war film conventions. Rather than romanticizing resistance, Frankenheimer creates documentary-like realism that emphasizes the technical and ethical challenges of sabotage. The film's central question receives no simple answer, with both Labiche and von Waldheim offering compelling perspectives on cultural preservation amid destruction. The film's most remarkable aspect is its commitment to practical effects. All train sequences were shot with full-sized locomotives and real derailments rather than models, creating action sequences of unprecedented authenticity. Cinematographer Jean Tournier's black-and-white photography employs newsreel-like techniques that enhance the period setting while creating visual distinction between the mechanical precision of the trains and the moral ambiguity of the human drama. Lancaster, performing many of his own stunts, brings physical authority and moral complexity to Labiche, creating a resistance fighter motivated by practical considerations rather than ideological certainty. Paul Schofield's von Waldheim transcends Nazi stereotypes, presenting an art connoisseur whose cultural sophistication exists alongside moral blindness about the human costs of his aesthetic appreciation. The screenplay by Franklin Cohen and Frank Davis uses the central conflict over art to examine larger questions about what values survive war's destruction. Unlike simpler resistance narratives where sabotage is unambiguously heroic, The Train shows how each act of resistance triggers brutal reprisals against civilians, forcing Labiche to weigh cultural heritage against immediate human suffering. Despite critical acclaim and commercial success, The Train has been somewhat overshadowed in discussions of great war films, despite offering perhaps the most sophisticated examination of resistance ethics in cinema. Its moral complexity and technical achievements in practical effects remain impressive decades later. Number 5. The War Lover, 1962. Based on John Hersey's novel, this psychological drama follows American bomber crews stationed in England during World War II, focusing on the disturbing relationship between pilot Buzz Rickson and navigator Beau Bolland. While outwardly a skilled combat leader, Rickson reveals increasingly troubling signs of combat addiction and sexual dysfunction, using bombing missions as substitute for healthy human connection. What distinguishes The War Lover is its unflinching examination of how war can attract and shape personalities drawn to sanctioned violence. Director Philip Leacock presents Rickson not as a conventional hero, but as a man whose technical excellence masks profound psychological damage. The film's central insight creates uncomfortable examinations of military psychology rarely addressed in more celebratory war narratives. Steve McQueen delivers one of his most complex performances as Rickson, subverting his cool persona to create a character whose external competence masks internal emptiness. His scenes with love interest, Daphne, reveal his inability to connect emotionally except through dominance, while his relationship with Wagner's more balanced Beau creates tension between professional respect and moral revulsion. The aerial sequences featuring actual B-17 flying fortresses achieve remarkable authenticity without romanticizing combat. Cinematographer Oswald Morris captures both the technical precision of bombing operations and the terrifying vulnerability of aircraft under attack. These sequences emphasize procedure and teamwork rather than individual heroics, creating more realistic portrayal of strategic bombing than most war films. The screenplay by Howard Koch moves beyond simple combat narrative to explore how war shapes sexuality and male bonding. The love triangle between Rickson, Beau, and Daphne becomes metaphor for different responses to combat. Rickson's addiction to the power of destruction, Beau's sense of duty despite fear, and Daphne's representation of life-affirming values incompatible with Rickson's combat mentality. Despite featuring McQueen at the height of his popularity, The War Lover received limited commercial success, perhaps because its psychological complexity challenged audiences expecting more straightforward heroism. Today, its examination of combat psychology and the personality types attracted to warfare remains disturbingly relevant to understanding military culture. Number 4. Fail Safe, 1964. Sidney Lumet's tense thriller portrays an accidental nuclear crisis when a technical malfunction sends American bombers toward Moscow with attack orders that cannot be countermanded. As military and political leaders attempt to recall the planes or shoot them down, the film creates nail-biting examination of how technological systems can override human control with potentially apocalyptic consequences. What makes Fail Safe extraordinary is its documentary-like realism. Unlike most Cold War thrillers, Lumet employs stark minimalism, shooting in black and white with no musical score, using sparse, functional settings, and focusing on procedural details rather than melodrama. This approach creates unbearable tension through the systematic portrayal of how fail-safe systems can catastrophically fail when human and technological errors combine. The performances emphasize professional restraint rather than histrionics. Henry Fonda brings grave authority to the president, who must make an unthinkable sacrifice to prevent full-scale nuclear war, while Walter Matthau delivers a chilling portrayal of Professor Grote Schele, whose intellectual embrace of game theory and acceptable casualties represents the dehumanizing logic of nuclear strategy. Cinematographer Gerald Hirschfeld creates visual claustrophobia through tight framing and stark lighting in the underground command centers and government offices where most action unfolds. The contrast between these sterile environments and the human consequences of decisions made within them creates powerful commentary on how technology distances decision-makers from the human impact of their actions. The screenplay by Walter Bernstein systematically dismantles reassuring narratives about technological safeguards. By showing how routine procedures, technical glitches, and communication problems can combine to defeat multiple redundant safety systems, the film creates disturbing examination of how nuclear annihilation could result from error rather than intention. Though acclaimed by critics, Fail-Safe suffered commercially from appearing shortly after the similarly themed but satirical Dr. Strangelove. While Kubrick's film addressed nuclear anxiety through black comedy, Lumet's straightforward approach creates equally powerful commentary through procedural realism that remains disturbingly plausible decades later. Number 3. Hell in the Pacific, 1968. John Boorman's experimental war film follows just two characters stranded on a deserted Pacific island during World War II. Initially attempting to kill each other, they gradually form an uneasy alliance to survive, creating a microcosm of how human connection can transcend national enmity. What makes Hell in the Pacific revolutionary is its radical minimalism. Boorman eliminates conventional war film elements to focus entirely on the fundamental humanity beneath national allegiances. This stripped-down approach forces viewers to confront war's absurdity when reduced to just two individuals without ideological context. The film's greatest strength is its performances. Mifune and Marvin bring physical authority and personal understanding to their roles. Their communication through gesture, expression, and physical competition creates more powerful examination of cross-cultural understanding than conventional dialogue could achieve. Their gradual shift from enemies to reluctant companions unfolds through behavior rather than exposition. Cinematographer Conrad Hall captures the island's natural beauty in widescreen compositions that emphasize both its paradise-like qualities and the character's isolation within it. The contrast between the idyllic setting and the men's initial violent intentions creates visual commentary on how artificial national divisions override natural human connection. Lalo Schifrin's innovative score combines traditional Japanese instruments with contemporary techniques, creating soundscape that reflects the cultural barriers and gradual communication between the characters. The sound design emphasizes natural elements, waves, wind, rain, creating auditory environment that contrasts with the man-made conflict between the castaways. Despite the star power of its leads, Hell in the Pacific found limited commercial success, perhaps because its experimental approach and ambiguous ending challenged audience expectations. Today, its minimalist examination of warfare's fundamental absurdity and its exploration of how human connection transcends national division feels more sophisticated than many more conventional war narratives. Number 2. Commandos, 1968. This Italian-German production, directed by Armando Crispino, follows a unique World War II mission where Allied commandos must impersonate German soldiers to infiltrate a heavily fortified Libyan fortress and steal crucial intelligence before Rommel's forces can destroy it. Led by American intelligence officer Major Sullivan and including Italian and British operatives with personal vendettas against the Nazis, the team must maintain their German disguises while navigating complex moral situations. What distinguishes Commandos is its moral complexity and international perspective. Unlike American or British war films that present clear heroic narratives, this European production examines how national perspectives, personal traumas, and military necessity create ethical gray areas. The protagonists' disguise as German soldiers forces them to participate in actions against civilians and partisans, creating powerful questions about moral compromise in pursuit of military objectives. Lee Van Cleef, best known for westerns, brings steely authority to Sullivan, creating a commander whose single-minded focus on the mission raises disturbing questions about ends justifying means. Jack Kelly delivers a nuanced performance as Lieutenant Aldo Ferri, an Italian-American soldier whose conflicted heritage creates additional layers of identity confusion during the masquerade. German actor Heinz Reinke provides complexity as a Wehrmacht officer who unknowingly assists the disguised Commandos while revealing his own ambivalence about Nazi leadership. Cinematographer Sandro Mancori captures the North African settings with widescreen compositions that emphasize both the harsh beauty of the desert and the claustrophobic tension of the fortress. The combat sequences focus on tactical complexity rather than heroic spectacle, creating more realistic portrayal of special operations than most mainstream war films. The screenplay by Dario Argento and others creates situational moral dilemmas that transcend simple combat narrative. When the disguised Commandos witness atrocities by actual German forces, their inability to intervene without revealing themselves creates devastating commentary on how warfare forces witnesses into complicity. Despite strong European reception, Commandos received limited American distribution and has been largely forgotten outside cult film circles. Today, its examination of identity, moral compromise, and the psychological burden of undercover operations offers sophistication rarely found in better-known World War II adventures. Number 1. Rebellion, Joiuchi Hariotsuma Shimatsu, 1967. Masaki Kobayashi's samurai drama set in feudal Japan might not immediately register as a war film, but this masterpiece offers one of cinema's most profound examinations of military ethics and the conflict between individual conscience and institutional loyalty. Toshiro Mifune stars as an aging samurai ordered to commit ritual suicide to resolve a political problem for his clan. What makes Rebellion extraordinary is its systematic examination of how military organizations sacrifice individuals for institutional convenience. Though set in 1725 Japan, Kobayashi creates clear parallels to modern military hierarchies and the moral questions faced by soldiers ordered to participate in unjust actions. The film's Japanese title emphasizes its focus on the fundamental conflict between personal ethics and institutional demands. Toshiro Mifune delivers perhaps his most nuanced performance as Isaburo Sasahara, creating a warrior whose lifetime of loyal service makes his eventual rebellion more powerful than youthful defiance would be. His transformation from obedient retainer to principled rebel unfolds with psychological realism that avoids both melodrama and simplistic heroics. Tatsuya Nakadai brings chilling bureaucratic menace to the clan counselor enforcing the unjust order. Cinematographer Kazuo Yamada employs widescreen black and white compositions that emphasize both ceremonial formality and the emotional turmoil beneath it. The combat sequences achieve balletic beauty while maintaining realistic brutality, showing both the aesthetic discipline and deadly purpose of samurai swordsmanship. Kobayashi, who himself resisted Imperial Japanese Army authority during World War II, infuses the film with personal understanding of how institutional power corrupts even basically honorable organizations. The screenplay systematically examines how euphemism, tradition, and collectivist rhetoric are employed to justify fundamental injustice. Despite winning the Fipresci Prize at Venice Film Festival, Rebellion remains less known internationally than some Japanese samurai films, despite offering perhaps the most sophisticated examination of military ethics in 1960s cinema. Its exploration of when resistance to unjust orders becomes moral necessity transcends its period setting to address universal questions faced by soldiers in all eras.